Chigwell, Holmes and the Violin Case. From the Encyclopedia of Acton Town. An excerpt from the short story by Sir Arthur Conan Body as published in the Strand magazine in 1888. I, Dr. John Watford, having just completed another adventure with my esteemed companion, the famous detective Mr. Chigwell Holmes, proceed to describe the events which, to my continued chagrin, led Mr. Holmes to take up playing rather badly a certain musical instrument. "What a remarkable case, Holmes," I said, closing the door behind us as we entered the familiar environs of our lodgings on Beaker Street. "I always had my suspicions on the butler, but how on earth did you deduce the murder weapon was the sharpened cucumber?" "Elementary, my dear Watford." On those words Holmes pulled a shiny new shilling coin from his jacket pocket, as per our previous agreement, and handed it over to me. Only 27 more and my prediction would be correct. It is, as always, down to observation and deduction, my dear fellow. The fact that the said garden vegetable was protruding from the poor victim's body, covered in blood, whilst still being held in the butler's hands, all pointed to one obvious conclusion. However, as Lord Carruthers Smythe corrected me on the actual rituals of the Freemasons, I was able to rule that line of inquiry out. So instead I bade Inspector Lestrange to arrest the butler with all haste. On searching the butler, a cucumber sharpening device was indeed discovered on his person. This device, I believe, is referred to amongst the criminal fraternity as a knife. You never cease to amaze me, Holmes. But tell me one thing. Why did you see fit to remove the violin case from his lordship's drawing-room when we were leaving? "Watford," said Holmes, eyeing the violin with unbroken concentration, "it looks like a fascinating instrument with lots of strings and things, and I will study it to understand what it does." My attention turned to the table. Strewn across the table was a half-finished game of Acton Town, which this morning had been interrupted by the telephone call from Inspector Lestrange requesting our presence at his lordship's mansion. This was a game I was eager to complete, for I had an advantage over Holmes for the first time in living memory. My knight on Rayners Lane and rook on Ruislip Manor had trapped Holmes' queen on Eastcote, and Holmes' only means of escape, the advance to Marylebone card, which Holmes himself had introduced to the game only 2 years ago, had already been played. "Shall we finish the game then, Holmes?" I inquired hopefully. "I'm sorry, Watford, it's been a very trying day and I wish to study this violin." Holmes proceeded to remove his coat, and, in doing so, knocked over the game in a deliberate move made to appear accidental. "Oh, I'm dreadfully sorry. How completely careless of me. I fear that position was too complex to recreate from memory. I suppose we must notify the Acton Town Gamesmanship Club and advise them to declare this game null and void on the coupons." Holmes hung his coat before settling down in his chair. He picked up the violin and the fiddle, and started to move the fiddle over the violin's strings. "Have you seen this, Watford? If I move this stick across the violin's strings, it makes a noise." "Well done, Holmes," I replied. "I must admit, however," continued Holmes, "that the sound it is currently making could not be described as melodious." I heartily agreed. The blood now coming out of my left ear bore testament to Holmes' observation. Holmes suddenly turned pale, as if struck by an ailment of the liver or some such. "Watford, call me a cab, and quickly." "But, Holmes, you promised," I protested. Holmes was most adamant. "Damn it, man, there isn't a moment to lose. Do it." "Okay, but this is really the last time." I drew my breath sharply. "Holmes, you're a cab." Holmes quickly recovered his composure. "Thank you, Watford, that was just in the nick of time." Dr. Watford dismisses the hansom cab driver. "It's okay, we won't be requiring you after all. Mr. Holmes has recovered. And by the way, what happened to our usual plain-looking driver?" "Now, Watford, where were we?" said Holmes, more brightly. I decided I would distract Holmes with a cunning ploy. You were going to finish cataloguing your collection of rare South American fruit bats? Nice try, Watford. I had forlornly hoped that Holmes would let his guard down. But now that you mention it, I did read an amusing article recently in Scientific Quest Londoner speculating on the effect of music, particularly string instruments, on these very species. I fell back into my chair with a great degree of despondency, rolling my eyes to the ceiling and admonishing myself for my stupidity. Holmes proceeded to take the jars containing his fruit bat collection from the specimen cupboard and placed them on the table, oblivious to the remnants of the Acton Town game. He then picked up the violin and manufactured a noise I can only describe as so hideous that the scraping of fingernails on a blackboard would seem as pleasurable as a sherbet piano concerto. It is noted that if the reader is not favorably disposed to the music of sherbet, then the analogy may not be fitting. I was only able to protect my hearing from permanent damage in the very shortest margins of time with the rapid application of a pair of ornamental ivory ear plugs, which had been left to me a few years ago by my favorite great-aunt. There was a worrying delay whilst I read the instructions, which I had to translate in my head into Mandarin, necessary since an old war wound I had received in the Crimea, as to which orifice of the body the plugs were to be applied. Holmes, I shouted above the racket, surely the article refers to the effect of music on live specimens?